Welcome to this explainer on the invisible architecture of the mind. Your brain is, without a doubt, an absolute biological marvel. It's this incredibly complex structure that actually starts building its foundation way before we're consciously aware of it. So today, we're going to map out this invisible architecture together. We'll look at exactly how it can get compromised, and most importantly, how we can actively rebuild it. Okay, let's just dive right into this. To truly appreciate what the brain is doing, we have to understand its absolutely staggering capacity. Your brain is capable of storing roughly 2.5 petabytes of data. Now, to put that massive number into perspective, that's the equivalent of 3 million hours of video, enough to literally run a TV continuously for over 300 years. But here's the really wild part. The editing of all this mental footage, it actually begins long before you can even speak a single word.
Picture this. While you're still developing it in the womb, you're already receiving what researchers like to call postcards from the outside world. These messages basically tell your developing brain if the world you're about to enter is a place of abundance and warmth, or if it's a landscape full of danger and hostility. For some of us, these early postcards are comforting, but for others, they're persistent, undeniable warnings of a storm to come. And when those warnings of danger become constant, when they just don't stop, well, that's what researchers clinically call childhood trauma.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to cover 1. The brain's early postcards. 2. The anatomy of neglect. 3. Toxic stress inside the brain. 4. Understanding your attachment style. And finally, 5. The resilience roadmap. All right, part 1. The brain's early postcards. Preparing for the world. We usually think of trauma as this one huge explosive event, right? But as we look at the actual definition here, we really need to shift our focus. Childhood trauma is very often the quiet, persistent absence of what a child needs to thrive. In that kind of environment, the developing brain doesn't just give up and halt its growth. It actively adapts. It literally wires itself specifically to survive what it perceives to be a really scary-looking world. It just goes into pure, unfiltered survival mode.
Moving into part 2, the anatomy of neglect, missing pieces of the foundation.
When we look closely at the anatomy of neglect, it really breaks down into 3 distinct pillars. First up, there's physical neglect. That's the lack of your basic nutrients or basic physical safety. Next is cognitive neglect, which happens when a child is totally denied vital mental stimulation. We're talking things like books, toys, or even just basic everyday conversation. And finally, there's emotional neglect. This is where a child's cries for comfort consistently go unanswered. And emotional neglect is often the most invisible form on the outside, yet it's incredibly, deeply impactful on the inside.
To really grasp the heavy, real-world impact of cognitive and emotional neglect, let's slow down for just a second and look at Daniel's story. Daniel was one of 500,000 children in Romania who grew up in state-run institutions. In these specific environments, children experienced almost zero human contact. It's a heartbreaking, localized reality, but it shows us exactly what happens when the human brain is entirely starved of connection. So Daniel's environment, it had absolutely no toys to spark his imagination and no soothing voices to calm his fears. But because he lacked this totally necessary social stimulation, his brain still had to adapt somehow. Like a lot of other kids in his situation, Daniel developed what are called self-stimulation habits, things like rocking back and forth, simply just to feel something. Because his environment provided no rich experiences during the brain's absolute fastest period of growth, his mental architecture effectively missed out on the core foundations you need for all future learning. All right, part 3, toxic stress inside the brain, the chemical flood.
Okay, so what's actually happening chemically here? When a child feels threatened, their adrenal glands, which are sitting right above the kidneys, they just flood the system with adrenaline and cortisol. Now, in small doses, normal stress acts as a brilliant temporary survival tool. It keeps you safe. But when that stress never stops, it becomes toxic. The chemical flood is just continuous, and the body literally never gets the clear signal that it's safe to finally power down. When that stress is toxic, it acts a lot like a slow-moving poison for a developing brain. When we look at MRI scans, children who experienced extreme neglect actually show a significantly smaller overall brain mass compared to kids who grew up in loving, supportive homes. The actual physical architecture of the brain is altered by the environment. It's staggering. And it's so important to realize this isn't just in your head, psychologically. It is deeply biological. Toxic stress can actually flip genetic switches, altering the expression of your genes.
This can lead to severe lifelong physical issues, like a majorly increased risk for heart disease or depression decades down the line. What's also fascinating and honestly super important for us to know is that symptoms resulting from this early home life drama, like having trouble paying attention or having sudden emotional outbursts, are so frequently misdiagnosed as ADHD.
Let's zoom back out for part 4, understanding your attachment style, the relationship loop. Now, this matrix right here is a total game changer for understanding ourselves as adults. These early childhood experiences completely shape your attachment style. If you had a safe base growing up, you likely became secure, viewing the world generally with trust. But if your caregiver was unpredictable, you might lean towards anxious ambivalent, exhibiting behaviors that essentially scream to be noticed. If you were punished for showing emotion, you might be anxious avoidant. You learn to just hide your feelings to stay safe. And the most severe, anxious disorganized, happens when the very person you seek for safety is the exact same person you fear. That often results in a deep, deep feeling of being completely unworthy of love.
I actually just want to take a quick pause right here. If you're recognizing yourself in Daniel's story, or if you're seeing your own adult behaviors mapped out in those attachment styles, please hear this. It was absolutely never your fault. These were complex survival mechanisms created by a developing brain that was just trying to navigate a really scary world. They were not, and they are not, personal failures.
Which brings us to part 5, the best part, the resilience roadmap, rewiring the architecture. So we've mapped out the problem, but how do we actually fix it? How do we heal? Well, the secret is this amazing scientific concept called neuroplasticity. Think of your brain exactly like a muscle. It can literally grow, change, and adopt with the right training. Look, we can't erase the past, right? But utilizing learning by doing psychotherapies like cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavior therapy gives your brain the tools to actively rewire its invisible architecture and rebuild a truly healthy self-image. So let's build your practical resilience toolkit. Step 1, identify the style. Use a journal to track if your instinct is to cling, hide, or freeze during a conflict. Step 2, do a postcard audit. Take the time to write down 3 of those negative early messages you received and explicitly replace them with one solid growth truth. Step 3 is synaptic care. Try to prioritize just 15 minutes of daily, spaced repetition, mindfulness, or therapy reflection. Honestly, consistency here is infinitely better than trying to run a massive mental health marathon once a month. And finally, step 4, the safe haven exercise. Find just one safe person in your life and practice communicating one small vulnerability to them this week. Just one.
Look, rebuilding this invisible architecture, it's tough. It's really hard work, and having setbacks is a completely natural, unavoidable part of the healing process. As the brilliant Samuel Beckett once put it, try again, fail better. It is all just part of the daily practice of resilience.
So I'm going to leave you with this one final thought to chew on. Have you experienced that shift from a fixed to a growth mindset in your own healing journey? I would really love for you to share your story and engage with the community in the comments below. It genuinely helps others feel a little less alone in this. And hey, if you found value in this explainer and want to support our mission to bring these vital lessons directly into classrooms everywhere, please consider checking us out on Patreon. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep building that resilience, and I'll catch you next time.